14 years of broken promises, a love interest that lied and strung her heart through the mud. Was Jean Harris a woman that was pushed over the edge? What happened next were the actions of a desperate woman. Today we're going to talk about the case of Jean Harris. Hi friends, welcome back to another true crime episode. I'm Faiza, and every week I talk about a true crime story whilst I get unready with you guys. So if you're interested in true crime, horror films, anything morbid, I'm here for you every week. Without any further rambling, let's get into today's story. So Jean Harris was born on April 27th, 1923 in Chicago, Illinois. Her dad was called Albert and her mom was called Mildred, and she was the second of 4 children. She attended Laurel School in Shaker Heights, located in Ohio, and she also attended Smith College, and she passed with flying colors. With Jean, I've noticed that she is very proper, well-spoken, intelligent. I don't know how high her IQ is, but she was a very hard worker. She put pride and effort into everything that she does. In 1945, she graduated and she got a degree in economics. She married her husband, whose name was Jim, and I don't know much about their marriage, but they had 2 sons together called Jim and David, and everything seemed fine up until they got divorced in 1966. However, in 1977, her husband died. I'm not sure how he died. I couldn't find any information regarding his death, but no foul play was involved. So in December of 1966, Jean met Herman, a famous cardiologist. He was also known as the Scarsdale diet doctor, and people were buying his book. He became so wealthy, so well known because of this book. And that book, everybody had it. Everybody had that book. So he was a well-respected doctor living in New York City. I'm telling you, that book that he published, it sold millions. Everybody had a copy of his book. So the two began a 14-year relationship. And I would actually call it a situationship because her heart was in limbo. Herman wasn't treating her with respect and kindness. At some point, he proposed to Jean and then dumped her shortly afterwards because she called him and was like, "Are we going to set a date for our wedding?" And he was like, "Yeah, sorry, this isn't for me." However, Jean stayed. I'm thinking, no, Jean, don't stay. He ended the relationship, but you're still hanging around. And Herman just decided to live his life, you know? He was like, "Oh, you can stay if you want, but I have already mentally moved on." However, Jane didn't. So, as I said before, Herman was so hot and cold with her, and as the years rolled by, he was just treating her like trash. Let's just say it how it is. He was mean to her, and then he would, love bomb her by taking her out to lavish vacations. He would buy her a gift every time they argued. It was all meaningless, but Jean was grasping at straws, thinking, he's going to turn into the man that I want him to be. And that was mistake number 1. But when I tell you he was spoiling Jean, he was spoiling her. However, he did tell her that he is sleeping with other women, and Jean just ignored it. She just thought, oh, he's just getting it out of his system, and she's just thinking, oh, he will get back to his senses, and these are just meaningless flings. He's not in love, so I still have a chance. I just find this really, really, really upsetting, but what can you do? When you're in love, and you tend to be not that logical, So Jean worked as a headmistress of a Madeira school. It's an all-girls school that was located in McLean, Virginia. And can you imagine? She works in Virginia and her supposed boyfriend is living in New York City, over 5 hours away. So they were contacting through phone and everything, but it was mostly from Jean's side, She was contacting him and he was busy each and every time she called. And I'm thinking, girl, just get the hint. He's not interested in you. Herman didn't care about Jean at all. He was just living his own life. Jean was getting stressed out over the relationships that Herman was having, all of the affairs that he was just parading right in her face, and he decided, because he is a doctor, he prescribed her medications that she became quickly addicted to. And what did he prescribe her, you ask? He prescribed her methamphetamines. It wasn't any drugs. These were drugs that were making her mellow and helping her sleep, helping her to stay up. So he prescribed her methamphetamines and other drugs that were making her very, very erratic. He was practically giving her speed, and she needed drugs to stay awake. She needed drugs to fall asleep. It was a very vicious cycle, and she wasn't performing well at work because of it. I mean, I don't blame her, you know? She became addicted without realizing it. I think he prescribed her all of these drugs to keep her from complaining. I'm not sure. So all of this was happening for a number of years, and Jean was heavily addicted to these drugs, okay? And in 1970, Herman hired a medical receptionist, okay? And she was spending a lot of time with him, if you know what I mean. She was around 30 years younger than him. Her name was Lynn Tarnower, and she began a illicit affair with Herman. And they weren't hiding it from anyone, to be honest. He pursued her, I believe, and the two became inseparable. And before you know it, they were in a relationship, and Jean was spiraling. Jean was failing at her workplace, she was failing in her personal life, and she was just becoming more and more unhinged. Jean saw herself as an aging woman, and compared to Lynn, she was just getting forgotten about. Lynn was getting everything that Jean wanted. She got Herman's attention. She winded up living with him. The two were inseparable. They were going to prestigious events together. And Jean was getting spoken to less and less. And Herman was getting colder and more distant. And at some point, he told her to leave him alone. He was like, I can't handle this jealousy. Leave me alone. She was calling him. She was freaking out. She was complaining about Lynn and how he could be with her and so on. And what does she have that I don't have? You get it. She was upset. Jean was thinking, I have invested 14 years of my life with him. And this woman just sprawls in and takes everything that belongs to me. And her obsession grew. It was literally overtaking her, you know. She was like, I am not giving up this man without a fight. Remember how I said that Jean was failing at her workplace? She has excluded 4 female students from her class because they bought, and the parents were upset. They were like, how dare you kick my baby out of this prestigious private school? And the parents were protesting. Some of the students didn't like her anymore because she became such a disciplinarian, you know. She was very mean. She was just terrible to be around. She was cold and dismissive. However, Jean was on drugs, and these girls were bringing drugs to school, so it seemed very hypocritical of her. But at the time, she didn't realize that she was addicted to these substances. I need a little bit more concealer. So we're in the late 1980s now. It is winter. It is cold. Jean is completely spiraling. Okay. She heard from a friend of a friend that Lynn was, moving into Herman's apartment. And she decided to, you know what? I'm going to go out for a drive and speak to Herman because she just wanted to talk, So instead of, building up her life again and getting out of this toxic situationship, she decides to drive 5 hours to see Herman. That is a 264-mile drive from Virginia to New York. And I'm thinking, you just needed to go to bed, Jean. Like, what are you doing? You're literally chasing a man. I mean, no disrespect, but this is not how you do things, So Jean had a elaborate plan. She was carrying a 32 caliber revolver, which is some sort of gun, right? And she wanted to commit suicide. And Herman has to basically tell her that he's still in love with her and how she shouldn't go through with it. And he would probably come back to his senses. The two would basically, start their relationship again and everything will work out. This is what Jean wanted. And as you can tell, this is a mind of a very desperate woman that was obsessed with this man. She has been, in some sort of relationship with him that wasn't solidified and he didn't really pursue her. And she has this whole fantasy in her head. However, she couldn't accept that the relationship was over and he was no longer interested. So Jean ends up at the apartment, and when she's there, she wakes up Herman from his sleep. He was dead asleep in his bed, okay? Mind you, this is the middle of the night, and as she wakes him up, she was like, Herman, wake up, I just want to talk. And Herman looks at her and he allegedly says, Jesus, Jean, you're crazy. Get out. Get out of here. According to Jean, a struggle happened because nobody truly knows what has happened that night. And with that said, she was planning to kill herself, but, Herman tried to take the gun off her. And then, they were struggling for the gun and she ended up shooting him 4 times in his chest. And then 3 more shots landed on his shoulder and into his back. So Herman stumbled and fell onto the bed and he died shortly afterwards. 4 bullet wounds, there was no chance of survival, So Jean said that she wanted to commit suicide. However, she placed extra bullets in her jacket pocket. So prosecutors were like, nah, I don't think you was planning to kill yourself. They believed that she was a deranged woman that couldn't make a man fall in love with her. And she wanted him all to herself to the bitter end, So it's more like, if I can't have you, nobody can. She just couldn't let go, and it's just so sad. So Jean shot Herman 4 times in close range, So a lot of blood, a lot of spillage was going on. It was a brutal scene. So Herman's housekeeper could hear all of the commotion and she decided to call the police, and the police shortly arrived. So Jean did something quite strange. She decided to get out of the house. She drove around for a bit and then she followed the police back to Herman's house. And then this is where she told the police that she is the one that shot him. She was ultimately arrested and booked for 2nd-degree murder. And this is where the trial starts. It was a media frenzy. The whole world wanted to know about the story, A woman gone mad, a woman scorned. They wanted to know the details. A celebrity doctor killed in cold blood. I forgot to mention, but when Jean was in Herman's house moments before she killed him, she noticed that, she walks into the bathroom and she noticed that there was a bit of lingerie, sprawled out in the bathroom, and she was just like, okay, this was the final trigger, and she had enough. I think that's what encouraged her to kill Herman, because she knew he will never take her back. So Jean was booked for 2nd-degree murder and she pleaded not guilty. She insisted that the whole thing was an accident. She said that the gun went off accidentally multiple times and Herman tried to wrestle the gun away from her. So Jean was released on bail and she paid $80,000, and this was raised by her brothers and sisters, and she was taken to a hospital called Portchester for psychiatric treatment. She also had to undergo therapy in order to build up her defense. So the case went on trial at the Westchester County Courthouse in White Plains in New York City on November 21st, 1980. The whole world was watching. There was cameras, the media, the press. Everybody wanted to know what really happened. And another thing people were interested in was the Scarsdale's letter that she wrote moments before she decided to, drive all that way to confront Herman. And in that letter, I couldn't find it on the internet, but she was just going off. It was a well-written letter. about her feelings, about her frustrations over the years, on how Herman was wasted 14 years of her life, and she was waiting and waiting to be his wife and his one and only, but that was further from the truth. She couldn't accept that the relationship was over. The trial lasted 14 weeks, which was the longest in state history, and the press was there and people were talking, and a lot of people realized that Jean's personality and how she presented herself in court wasn't really, she wasn't very sympathetic. The jury found her very entitled, and she kind of seemed uppity, and she gives you that vibe that she is way better than you. But get this, her lawyers told her that she shouldn't take the stand. However, she refused. And because of her arrogant behavior, her arrogance really got her sentence, and the judge decided, and the jury, they all decided that she should serve at least 14 years to life in prison. And, she was then thrown into prison. The prosecution believed that she didn't shoot by accident, because how can you shoot someone 4 times accidentally? Maybe the first shot was an accident, but the other ones, because she also drove over 5 hours with a gun in her car, trying to confront this man. She couldn't control her emotions that night. He was triggering her, but he also ended the relationship. So my question was, why is she even there? Why was she still speaking to him? So the jury deliberated for only 8 days, and they have come to the conclusion that Jean is charged with second-degree murder, and she is sentenced to 14 years to life in prison. Consequently, Jean was not eligible to inherit $220,000 Herman had left her in his will because she killed him. However, over the years, Jean was adamant. She was telling the whole world that she didn't intentionally kill Herman. It was a freak accident. But Jean did remarkable things in prison. She was tutoring inmates. She was helping them pass their GEDs, the high school diplomas, and helping them get into universities. However, she was, being very productive in prison and stuff. And she was thriving, She found herself again. She was no longer addicted to drugs. She opened a in-prison nursery for babies born to inmates. So 11 years after Jean's conviction, she did suffer from 3 separate heart attacks. And, she was of old age at this point, So she was granted clemency. So in December 29th, 1992, she was set free. We didn't really hear from her ever since. But she did get into a interview with Barbara Walters, and she was still showing signs that she felt very remorseful for what she has done, but she still didn't admit that she intentionally killed him. Do you guys think it was an accident? I don't know. Nobody really knows what has happened that night. Do you think the consistent drug use made her paranoid and obsessed, or was it her own actions that killed Herman? So with that said, Jean died of natural causes, I'm assuming old age, on December 23rd, 2012. She died peacefully in her sleep, and her sons were by her side. She was 89 years old. So this story is about heartbreak, betrayal, and a woman scorned. This is what happens when you stay with someone that doesn't love you. And if you stay with someone that doesn't love you, appreciate you, nothing you can do will change their mind. It is better to move on, because I honestly do believe there's someone out there that will give you everything that you want. This woman went through mental turmoil to the point she killed a man. I do have sympathy for her, but at the same time, you don't, buy a gun, drive 500 miles, and then shoot the man. I mean, she killed him. But I do believe that she loved him to the bitter end. There's also a film inspired by today's case called Mrs. Harris that was released in 2005. I'm going to link it down below if you're interested. However, this leads us to the end of today's case. Please do stay safe and hydrated, and I'll see you guys again next week. Thanks for watching. Bye.